Shay also wanted me to ask, what was your PhD thesis on?
My dissertation was on how, so I was very interested in this kind of emerging research showing that younger Black women are disproportionately affected by the burden of breast cancer. So we know that it's affecting Black women generally, but we're also seeing it diagnosed among Black women at younger ages. We're also seeing more genetic mutations that lead to breast cancer development as well as other cancer development in younger Black women. And then also just sort of more aggressive forms of breast cancer. And so it's scary. A lot of the times, we think about cancer as something that, that's not really going to touch me till I'm maybe 50, maybe 60, and later than that. But we're seeing more and more Black women who are diagnosed in their 30s, maybe even 20s. It's scary, and we're not quite sure what factors are all coming together and what formula to make that happen. But I was thinking about that, and I was thinking about, being someone who's interested in the psychology behind cancer risk reduction and early detection. What if the guidelines for Black women start to change over the time? So what if, Black women start being recommended to start mammographies 10 years earlier than everyone else, 20 years earlier than everyone else, maybe recommended more widely to get genetic testing, all of these things. So, but that's a lot to process, especially if you are a young adult. And so I did a study that asked about young Black women's attitudes and thoughts about potential changing recommendations for breast cancer early detection and screening. So if, I basically created kind of hypothetical new guidelines based on the current guidelines, and saying, how would you feel about these? To what extent do you feel scared? To what extent do you feel like it's important, right? Because both can be true. You can recognize this is important and I should do this, but this is also really scary to think about at 25 or 30. And then also, what are your thoughts about this? How much of this information do you know about the breast cancer disparities? So that's basically what I did my dissertation about. And it was very interesting because I found a lot of the Black women said, yes, this is important. It's a little bit scary, but I would probably be likely to abide by these guidelines if they were implemented in the future. If it was recommended to me to start these things earlier, I would probably do it. And that's a really good sign. That's a really, really good sign. So we know that the interest and awareness is definitely increasing, but we'll see if the guidelines follow suit and the insurance coverage follows suit.
I think that's the biggest part. I think what insurance will pay for, because aside from maybe doing your self-exams and things of that nature, I think we do know that also when it comes to breast cancer, we have biomarkers within our system that if we're able to be have, I think, specific testing, and that might be the genetic testing that's done, that we would know that either we were either carriers or have a more likely chance of getting breast cancer. But I don't know whether that's something that insurance covers, or that's something that we as Black women or young Black women or brown women know to even ask for. Having conversations with your doctor on saying, I feel a lump, I feel this, or for them to say maybe that's just fatty tissue, or you're young, or what's your family history. And a lot of us might not know our family history, our family medical history. It could be, I had the aunt who had the cancer, not know what cancer. I know that's like in my family, diabetes runs, and it was like my uncle had the sugar. No one said.
Right.
It was things of that nature, but they weren't conversations. And my own self, I didn't have a mammogram until later on. I just was saying, I'll go next time. I didn't really understand the importance of another test for me to take. But, I'm not going to say I wasn't aware. I didn't know. I just felt as though it's not within my family history, but not knowing how far should I look in my medical history, my family history. What about, air quality, things I'm eating, processed food, all these other things that might not play a part when it comes to breast cancer, but there's ovarian cancer, there's cervix cancer. There's so many different types of things that I was probably putting myself at risk for and not knowing. But I think the biggest part is that not knowing your family history. I think that plays a really, really big part. Not following up with doctor's appointments, or feeling like I don't feel well, but it's okay, I feel better. And not following up on that. If you don't feel well, you should go to the doctor. It's just not that easy. Not everybody has insurance. Not everybody feels heard when they go to see their providers. Some people feel rushed. Some people don't feel comfortable in talking about what their needs are. And some people feel heavily burdened over everything that's happened within the last 3 years. And like you said, some people are still taking care of their families. Some people are the caregivers. So that's my point on that. But I believe Norquise.
So my question was like going all the way back into what you were saying, that you were interested like in cancer since like a young age. So you already know that was your career path. My question is like, what are some things that you grew up like being told about cancer that changed when you started studying it? Because things that I've grown up hearing is like, oh, you don't have to worry much about it because in your family no one has it, right? Like those are things that are like being told, and I know a lot of people that are told that, and therefore they don't really show much importance or like much worry about it. So what are things that changed when you started studying it?
Yeah, that's a great question as well. Well, first of all, I came from a family that didn't really talk about the big illnesses at all. I think they were trying to protect us as children and kind of not give us something to worry about. So when my grandfather was sick, nobody said, oh, he had cancer. They just, oh, he's sick and he's in the hospital, I don't know. So I wasn't really told much at all. And honestly, I'm trying to think if I was ever really briefed family history-wise when I got older. I don't think so much. So I wasn't really told much at all. So a lot of what I learned about it, I learned on my own. And I think it wasn't until I was probably in college that I really started to do like a lot of research on my own and started to understand. And there's a lot of I think misconception about the role that family history plays in cancer diagnosis. So yes, family history is incredibly important because it will help us catch some of those hereditary factors, right? And it's good to know if you have a long history of, oh, my aunt and my mom and my grandmother and all of that, okay, there's something going on there. So that's definitely something your doctor would want to know and might likely think about testing you genetically because they say there may be some genetic factor there, or just, let's watch a little closely or maybe get you started as early as we can get you started with mammograms or something. So some of that definitely plays a role, but it still is a relatively small percentage of people who are diagnosed with cancer who have like an immediate relative who has had cancer. So I think that sometimes people think, well, I don't have a family history, so I should be good, or that's not something I'm gonna have to worry about until later. But that's not true. And a lot of the research shows that, yeah, it's a very small percentage. Even the research about the genetic mutations among young Black women, I remember in that study, I believe it was a very small amount that had a first or second degree relative with that mutation. So it wasn't even something that was passed on. So they're, it's confusing. That's part of why we don't quite understand what's going on right now. And because of that, I always say don't make an assumption. Right? It's not a good thing to assume when it comes to your health. Same thing with what Leslie was saying about, I feel something, but okay, it feels better now, so I'm just going to assume maybe it's just a headache, it was a hard day, it was this or that. A lot of the times, the signs are there, and we're feeling something changing in our body, but it's about how closely we're listening to it. So I always say err on the side of caution. You're never going to regret having gotten the screen, having gotten the test, and it was nothing. It's better than the alternative, which is assuming it's nothing, and then finding out when it's later. And a lot of cancers are, there's a lot of options for treatments and therapies if caught in earlier stages. So, we can't prevent people from getting cancer altogether, but one of the big messages is always start early, start screening early, think about risk reduction early. And if you catch cancer at a stage more like 1 or 2 versus 3 or 4, when it is now starting to spread, you have a lot more options. The survival rates, the statistics for survival rates are typically a lot higher if you're catching it at those early stages. And another thing that I think people forget is that early stage cancer a lot of the times is not symptomatic at all. A lot of the times by the time you're feeling something, like something is okay, I can't ignore this. A lot of the times, unfortunately, it is in a more advanced stage because now, that cancer has been growing long enough to start to affect things in your body, right? Or start to feel off. So this is why that screening, whether or not you feel something is wrong, checking whether or not, is always a safe bet because you might be able to catch something before it gets a chance to create any symptoms in your body.
So I have a question. Have you ever witnessed a fellow coworker, diagnose someone, or have you been in that position before?
Diagnose them with cancer?
Yeah.
So no, I have not been in in a space where someone has been diagnosed and I was present for that, or even with my family, because my family kind of kept me from that. So BOLD, the Psychosocial Wellness Program out of MECC, has a peer navigation program. And our peer navigators are a trained group of cancer survivor volunteers called BOLD Buddies, who provide peer navigation and support for other cancer patients. So you can imagine someone who is, in high distress and is looking to speak to someone who's been in their shoes. That's where our BOLD Buddies play an invaluable role. And so our BOLD Buddies sometimes share, in their own testimonies about, how they received their diagnosis, how they received that news. And unfortunately, sometimes that has been over the phone, not even in the clinic sitting with the doctor. It was a call, and that person could have been anywhere. They could have been in the grocery store. They could have been picking up their kids from from daycare or something, so, or at work. So, and they talk about how devastating, obviously, receiving that news is, but how much harder it is to process that when it is not handled very carefully. So that's what we think about as a psychosocial wellness program, and also what I think about in messages to future doctors. So if any of you are future medical professionals where you'll be diagnosing patients, whether it is with a psychological disorder or a medical disorder, to really always think about the patient experience. And if I were in that person's shoes, what would I need in this moment? And what types of considerations and thoughtfulness would matter for me? Because it's a very pivotal moment when being diagnosed with any chronic illness, whether it's cancer, whether it's diabetes, whether it's MS or lupus or anything like that. And so that extra care, that thoughtfulness, making sure you're armed with resources, right? Because the first thing someone has is questions. So making sure that you have resources and support in place for them. And that's something that if I could leave you all with as future medical professionals to absolutely think about, because it matters and those people remember that for the rest of their lives.
Yeah.
So
A follow-up question. When you would hear these stories, how do you kind of ground yourself? Because, cancer is a really tough topic. So how do you kind of ground yourself and not kind of get so overwhelmed all the time?
Yeah, it's definitely a tough field to work in. But I am very fortunate to be in a position where we are helping people literally every day. And so yes, sometimes there are patients that we lose, unfortunately, or sometimes patients who are going through really tough times with their health, but Bold has created kind of a community, and so I see how much love and support is within that community. And then also being on the psychosocial wellness side of things, our main purpose is to provide that support and make sure we're taking care of the whole person behind the disease. And sometimes we're the only place that we're getting that level of support, or the only safe space where they talk about it, where they don't want to worry their family with all of this, right? So knowing that we're doing something that is helping to improve their well-being, help get them connected to any resources they need, help liaison and triage with doctors where needed, if they're having a hard time getting in touch or getting what they need, offsets that, because it's like we can't change that, it is what it is, but we can make it a little better for people, and that feels like the best that we can do. And so I'm happy to be a part of that. So I think for every sad thing or every sad news I get, there's so much positive that's helping to offset that. So I just put myself even more into the work, because there is so much positive and light and love in what we do. So I try to keep my focus there.
Thank you.
So with women that go through a hard time, and especially it's what I've seen and very important in the Black community when it comes to our hair and a sense of identity, and when they go through cancer, it's almost like the hair, some part of them, which is like how they identify themselves, how they show up for themselves, has to be cut off. So like my question for you is like, how are your thoughts on how specifically Black women go about when going through the process of cancer and they feel like they're losing a part of themselves, either part of themselves when it comes to their family or how they show up in the world?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And the cancer experience, unfortunately, is filled with a lot of loss, right? It's not just sometimes loss of life, but it's loss of parts of ourselves physically that we identify with, parts of our roles in our family unit or in our communities. So a lot of Black women are also, kind of the doers in their families, and so being in a position where you don't have the physical energy to be able to do that, or the time, or you're having to focus on something different, or you're losing your hair, or you've had a mastectomy and now you've lost your breasts and you don't recognize that part of you and you feel differently. So there's just so many different forms of loss. And with Black women, it's tough. And there's not anything you can really say or do that will reverse that. But providing a space to talk about it, providing a community of other Black women who are also processing that similar change in their physique or in their role or whatever, is a big part of it as well. And we do also with Bold and in partnership with Community Bridges to Success, we will be having a grand opening of what we're calling the Bold Boutique. And this was a wonderful, wonderful idea that's made possible by Ms. Leslie Harrison, and so important to address this issue, where we are providing free wigs and hats and scarves and other sort of beauty items and things that help people feel better and feel pampered and feel like they're able to really just take pride again in their physical appearance, which is undoubtedly challenged. Whether you're going through chemo and you're losing hair, or you're going through radiation and now you're dealing with dermatologic issues and your skin is changing, all of that. So our whole boutique, we're hoping, provides a space for women to pick out wigs for free, pick out hats and scarves and just things that make them feel very beautiful. We love to be able to bring in, do makeup and things like that. We've had a little beauty day that focused on some of those services. But all we can do is sort of provide as many resources and places to talk about it, people that are also processing similar changes, and then just any items that help people feel like themselves, help people feel like they're doing something to take care of their physical appearance. But unfortunately, it won't undo that. So we just try to uplift as best as possible. And for a lot of women, their hair does grow back. Sometimes it is a permanent change. It depends on their treatment and their course of treatment and what that looks like for them over their survivorship. But for some women, the hair does grow back. I know that the Cancer Center is also looking at certain technologies that help women, like cooling caps, that help at least keep that from being as permanent of a change as possible. So that helps kind of cool the temperature of the scalp, which helps preserve like the hair follicles and the health of the hair, so that it has a better chance of growing back and growing back fully post-treatment. So we're still kind of working on all of these other ways to kind of fill that gap, but unfortunately it is still there.
It is, and I know that I believe it was last year there was a clinical trial that was just opened up for Black and brown women, and we haven't had things like that before for women who have suffered hair loss due to chemotherapy or suffering with cancer. So we haven't really had that. And thank you for mentioning the our part with with the Bold Boutique. I think that our goal every year is just to also bring awareness to to also give support. It's an initiative to give support to Black and brown women in our community who suffer hair loss due to treatment. Also to give them a little bit of hope and let them know that their community is behind them and support them, and also to educate and empower us as women, of breast cancer awareness, cancer awareness. And we have to also include that, not only women suffer with breast cancer, so do men, and bring that awareness to our community as well. I just also want to mention that we will start doing our collecting again, but we're getting ready to wind down. And before we do, you had mentioned that your dissertation was on what would young black women do if given the opportunity. I would like to ask that question to each one of the ladies here. So if you can pose the question, and then we'll do a pass the mic cipher and answer the question.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'll take two things from it. I'll ask you all, if you were approached by you're going to your annual physical, and you're approached by your doctor about getting genetic testing done for maybe like a BRCA gene mutation, which is a mutation that if you have it, your risk of developing breast and ovarian and a few other cancers goes up incredibly high, like 80%, 60% chance that you will develop one of those cancers over your lifetime. If you have the opportunity to do that, a doctor, asks you, how do you feel about that? Would you want to proceed with that? Would you maybe want to proceed, but after you've asked some questions, what are your thoughts about it? The other is if you are asked to begin mammography screenings around 30, as opposed to around 40 or 45, which is more what the national average is and the general guidelines are for women across the U.S. How would you feel about starting mammography screening earlier? And you may not have like a full answer now, but what does that bring up for you? What are your thoughts about that?
I would feel nervous for the first test. Just Yeah, because I already know that it runs in my family. So just to be told, like, hey, you have like an 80% chance of getting cancer, and like, okay, that's not new. But I think it would strike fear in me more so, because I would like it would bring more so an awareness to me to be more conscientious about what I do with my body and how I proceed with taking care of myself. But after knowing that percentage, I don't think I would know what to do. I don't know how to move forward. Like, I know it runs in my family. I know, like, my aunt has had cancer. Other people in my it skips a generation, so then I don't know who it's gonna hop onto next, if I'm the next person. Thank God my mom hasn't had it, but she has scared because my aunt got it. And so I feel like being asked to do the test will almost encourage that lingering feeling that who's next. Because thank God my aunt has survived, but it's always this next question, like, who is it going to go towards now, and who's going to survive? So I think that would strike a bit fear in me. Like, I don't know what I would do with that percentage. I don't know what I would do with that number. It would almost feel like a grade. Like, yeah, you worked hard for it, but then it's like, what next? What do you do with that? And then the second thing would be the
mammography screening. If you were asked to start mammography screening, more like 30 as opposed to 40 or 40.
I wouldn't be surprised by that if I had to actually take it. Maybe that would be the next step, and that would be the logical step, but I wouldn't mind taking it. And I think that would be the safest thing for me to do. I think it wouldn't leave me with as much of a hopeless feeling. But I think for both of them, it would strike a bit of fear in me to think that, you know, if it's not today, it could be tomorrow.
For me, the second question, starting with that one, I definitely would prefer to get tested or screened earlier than later. And like, you know, I'm also like, as we're talking, I'm thinking more about when I get home, I'm gonna do my own self-exam, you know? Yeah, because it's like one of those things that you hear about a lot, and my mom is also in the medical field. So, you know, I've heard her talk about it. She's told me she's done her own exams, and she's tried to make me more comfortable. And a long time ago, I started doing it myself, but then I kind of just fell off, so I kind of want to pick that up again. And as far as your first question, I agree with what Tatiana said as well. Like, you know, it's a bit scary because I don't know much of my family history, but I do know that diabetes and lupus and things like that runs in my family. So it kind of definitely encourages me to go out and find those answers and just make myself more educated, so that way I know what I should be looking for and things like that. Yeah.
Well, starting with the first question, I feel like one thing that's inevitable is the fear, right? Like being told that, oh, you might have a life-changing disease, right? You can't help the fear, but again, it might, for me at least, it might personally change the way that I live my life, right? I might decide to take a healthier route. I might decide to like talk with my family and be like, okay, you guys need to tell me, because my chances are high, right? Has this been going on in our family? Like, has anybody died from it, right? And it's okay if they don't know. And at the same time, I feel like mentally, like when you're told that, like if I was told today as a teenager, I wouldn't know what to do. So the first thing is like, okay, what do I do, right? What can I do towards a doctor? How can I help myself? How can you help me? It's like answers that I would seek out, because like you said, a lot of things that happen are questions. Everybody has questions. For the second question, about the mammography, I would actually be really on board with that, right? Because from what I've heard, or like from my own base research, cancer does not develop overnight, right? So for you to be found with cancer today, there must have been signs like a year before, and like you said, the earlier the better. So yeah.
Personally, like everyone said, like I would be scared in the beginning, but then I feel like later on I would like calm down because it's like, okay, now that I know I have a high chance, now I know how to take the news when I'm told I actually have it. So it's like I'm preparing myself mentally and physically for the news and how I'll live my life after that. And for the second question, like Murky said, I wouldn't really mind it because the earlier the better. It's just preparing me for the future, to be honest. That's it.
Okay.
If I could say a few things about what you mentioned. Well, first of all, thank you so much for really giving an honest answer and answers and really thinking through that. With genetic testing, it's funny because actually this happened to me after my dissertation. Probably not the last time, but the time before that I went for a physical. In my intake paperwork, you're filling out all those forms before you start. There was a form in the packet that asked me if I was interested in genetic testing for mutations related to development of breast cancer, and if I was interested in pursuing it that day. And admittedly, despite being in the field I was like, oh no, I'm not prepared. I was terrified. And it caught me so off guard, I wasn't mentally prepared. So I completely identify with that fear. I'm like, oh, I don't know what I would do with that information. I don't even know that they would ask me to do this. Typically though, when you do go in for genetic testing, you are paired with a genetic counselor before you make the decision to do it and after to debrief your results. The reason is because of all of what you shared, that it is not a diagnostic test. It doesn't tell you you have cancer. It just says, hey, you now may have this elevated risk of developing it sometime in your lifetime. And so you're absolutely right. What do you do with that information? That answer varies from person to person, and you often don't even know what you can do with that information. And so that's what a genetic counselor is there for, is to also guide you through as you're making the decision. If you want to get tested, they'll share with you, well, these are the different outcomes, and this is kind of what we're dealing with. And then when you get your results, they will then kind of say, let's say you do test positive for a mutation, they tell you these are options. So some people choose to just watchful waiting. I don't want to do anything, but maybe I'll get my mammograms every 6 months instead of every year. You'll definitely get a clinical breast exam so they'll just be measures that your doctor will take to just kind of surveillance a lot more closely. There are medications that can be for people who are very high risk groups. There are medications that can be taken that have to do with hormones, and so it's able to reduce that risk. And then some people, I actually have a close friend from high school who chose to get a prophylactic mastectomy, which is basically when you cut the breast tissue off, remove your breasts in advance of a cancer diagnosis. So saying, I don't even want the tissue there to even have the chance, hopefully, to develop it. And so people will sometimes just remove the breast. I believe that's what Angelina Jolie did. Mm-hmm. So that's also an option, but obviously that's a very big decision, and so a counselor walks you through all of that. So just to let you all know, it is not recommended widely to get genetic testing, and that is because they're not sure that the psychological distress that can come from those test results is always worth knowing, and that it's really an individual decision. So it's not a, hey, everyone at some point should get it done. But when they start to see genetic mutations and, concentrated in certain groups, may say, hey, you might want to think about it as an option. And unfortunately, Black people generally are not approached with genetic testing. the same way other groups are. That's just a fact. It's usually not even presented to us as often as an option. So if you don't even know to ask about it or don't know to look into it, it may never even kind of cross your medical chart. So I bring it up for you all to kind of, look into it on your own. Feel free to ask your doctor questions about it. That doesn't mean you have to pursue it. But sometimes we're just not offered the same things. It's the same thing with clinical trials, and Leslie mentioned clinical trials earlier, but there's such an underrepresentation of people of color, Black folks, in clinical trials, and clinical trials are what we use to develop treatments, and what we use to develop therapies, and what we use to develop a lot of our medical models. And so when they're based off of a very specific group of people, we don't know how that then maps onto us, and we don't want to learn the hard way, in practice. So all of that to say, a lot of the times our community is not approached with these opportunities and these options. And so your best bet is to do some reading on your own and bring it to your doctor. And if you ever have a doctor that doesn't listen, you get another doctor. I tell that to everybody because unfortunately doctors are people too, and they come with their own biases, and they overlook things and they're busy and all of that as well. So just be advocates for yourself and really try to arm yourself with as much knowledge as possible so that we can do our part, at least in kind of filling those gaps and disparities. Even though it's not our responsibility, it's the best we can do what we've got.
So we're going to end up here, but I do want to thank everybody. I just want to also piggyback on what you said. Black women, we have a 40% higher rate of dying from breast cancer. Yeah, higher rate. We are once we're diagnosed, we don't normally follow up when it comes with the mammogram. We take a mammogram and don't always follow up on it. It could be because of insurances, but it's also because we don't understand or know the importance of going back and forth when it comes to the doctor. Sometimes we don't want to borrow trouble. There's always sayings within our community, I don't want to borrow no trouble or whatever. I am past the age of what I would do as far as the testing, but I do want to say this. I was with my mom when she was diagnosed with cancer. She had a cold for over a year, and she had gone back and forth to the doctor. And my cousin worked in a hospital, and she had said to her, I think you need to be checked out by an oncologist. It was never suggested to her by her primary care physician. She saw an oncologist. She went on her birthday, and she was diagnosed with cancer. My mother died. She was diagnosed November 11th. In February, she had already passed. She had passed. So this plays such a big thing for me when it comes to education. I don't think my mom felt comfortable in speaking with her doctor. I don't think she felt comfortable in saying, I've had the cold for too long. I don't think she felt comfortable in saying medication wasn't working for her. I don't think she felt comfortable not taking off from work. And I think she died from fear. I don't want to die from fear. And if anything, I think our goal today was to have a conversation with you guys. So it's, to better arm yourselves, to educate yourself. And it just seems like, if anything else, to be more proactive or proactive. I don't want to say more proactive. But I just really think from the conversations that you had today, I think that was something that was accomplished. So I want to thank everybody for being able to share and feel comfortable. And this is just the beginning of our podcast. And I thank you, Dr. Miller, for being our first. And does anybody want to say any parting words?
I just kind of like a closing question for Dr. Miller, kind of like just for her. Like, I know your field is very challenging, considering you have to deal with such sometimes grief, fear, with people going through so much. And I just wanted to know, how do you help yourself, right? How do you stop yourself from sinking into those emotions that your patients would sometimes have?
Yeah, so I, outside of my work life, also pour into myself a lot, I think everybody should have some form of an outlet, whether that is some physical activity or some artistic expression or anything. For me, it's always been dance. I'm a dancer, and so I spend a lot of my time, and I have some other dancers with me, great. So I spend, a lot of my time just physically releasing a lot of that energy, and a lot of times we don't even realize we're holding stuff, and as Black people and as Black women, so that's a lot of the norm. Our main operating mode is like high stress, high burden, and so we don't know anything different. And so it's, it feels like that's the norm, that's fine, but it will wear on you over time. So with anything, that's how I, kind of offset work-related things and things with the patients that we work with, but for anything that causes you, any type of like stress or negative feelings or, just something that's tough to process, just having that outlet rather than, kind of internalizing and holding all of that, because your health will show you that over time, unfortunately, so you got to get it out of you. Yeah.
Before we go, if someone wanted more information about your organization, where to find Bold, can you give us some information on where to look for?
Absolutely. So I would say a very direct way to get to us is by email or phone. So our email is cancersupport@einsteinmed.edu. So pretty easy to remember, pretty straightforward, cancer support. We also help with navigation to cancer screenings and helping folks determine if they are eligible for screening. So if you have a family member who you're like trying to nudge them in the right direction, we're welcome, they're welcome to hop on a call with us. We could just talk to them, it just starts with a conversation. And if you have a cancer survivor in your life that is based in the Bronx, we're pretty Bronx focused, then they can reach out to us as well for the cancer support side. So, we try to help through the full continuum, whether it's in that early detection screening and just kind of talking about that prevention.